live now. At the moment, it doesn't look as though it is. So I think we're finally live. That took a while. So hopefully everybody is there and everybody can hear me. Tom, hello. You're there and present. Wonderful. So, look at this. It's been a month since we were last in this situation, last doing a live. And that month has gone really, really quickly. We've got loads of stuff done this end, but gosh, it's weird being back. And today we're going to talk about fear. So it's going to be the usual process. Hello, Steve. Hello. Yes, indeed. That's really good to have you on board just down the road. Yeah, we're getting there. We're getting there with the storms. Right. So usual process. David, hello. Jim, hello. We will have a very meandering conversation today, interrupted by lots of hellos. Those of you that can't stomach all of that and are watching it on replay, there may be an edited version succinctly cut down to just the highlights of whatever comes up today in the next hour or so. I don't know. That really is a question of getting around to it and getting those edits done. So we'll see, but I do understand. Hello, Margie, good to see you. So we'll see where we go today, but we're fundamentally talking about fear. And those of you that are not regulars to the lives and to the channel, just to give you some background, what we're really about here is talking about looking at life from a different aspect to perhaps the mainstream. We want to take the spiritual aspect of looking at things, looking at life, shifting our perspective to see or try to see the bigger picture. Now that involves all sorts of things like mindfulness, meditation, and dowsing. Those are the particular three key aspects, but what it's really about is trying to use our intuition and looking at the inner universe to actually lock into the power that you have from the subjective way of seeing the world, which is the spiritual aspect of seeing the world. So Nancy, good to see you too. Lovely to have you along again. That's great. So that's the perspective that we come at everything from. And what we try to do is to come at it all from a very, very grounded perspective. There are plenty of channels out there that are very fluffy, and that's great. That's great. We tend not to be so fluffy on this channel. Also, we try not to get too bogged down in things like conspiracy theories, although it's very easy to do so. And we will probably touch on that sort of thing today in the next hour as we talk about fear. JF, hello, good to see you. It has been a while. So, fear is one of the things that we do touch on a lot. And if we actually, hi Carol, good to see you. If we go back over some of the previous lives, then we'll see that fear comes up a lot. And actually, interestingly enough, one of the things that I was doing in the last 4 weeks, since we were last in this situation, was writing, I'm working on a proposal for my next book. Which, yeah, I know you'll laugh because I've been mentioning that for like a year, but I have actually got on to writing it now. I've got a deadline to get something submitted to Hay House just to see whether they like it or not. Hello, Lonnie, good to see you. And one of the things I realized in writing that book, in the synopsis of that book, is that actually fear comes up a heck of a lot as a theme within that book. And that is about how I got into the spiritual side, how things changed for me in my life, but it's also trying to give some handy, constructive hints and processes for people as they read through the story and develop the understanding of how my life changed in that sense, and see how normal everything was, but also to see how substantially different it became on a significant but subtle level. Okay, so fear was a big part of that. And now we find ourselves in this world, this physical world, with so much fear right now being really focused and really concentrated around things like the coronavirus. Hugo, good to see you. Good to see you. Coronavirus. So much fear. We'll go on to that in a minute. 5G. Oh, that's a contentious one. Everybody really, not everybody, so many people really concerned about 5G, about what's it doing. So many people feeling the effects of being subjected to what they consider to be EMF poisoning, the radiation poisoning, whatever, that sort of thing. These are two aspects of fear. and other stuff as well. I mean, quite apart from the political situation, which ever seems to sort of take us very close to the brink of a third world war or whatever. If we want fear, then that's where to look for it. So let's just focus a little bit on coronavirus. Now, what I don't want to do is just kind of launch in on the chat and and have a big debate about the cases of whether it's as massive as it appears to be, or whether it's as dangerous as it appears to be, or whether indeed media is being politically controlled for the ends, whatever those ends are, right? So I don't want it to become a sort of a funnel for our particular viewpoint on manipulation. However, having said that, this is really the angle that actually I wanted to look at it from. So that sounds a bit counterintuitive. What I want to do is to sort of take us through the way that I see how we instinctively create fear for ourselves. Now, this is not necessarily you guys actually here on the channel now, but collectively, the human species, we knee-jerk our way into an instinctive habitual reaction of fear and of, oh my God, what's going on now? And oh my God, this is going to really badly affect me. So the bottom line, you won't be surprised, is that we're going to be looking at how we can take those moments to actually just be really mindful when we encounter anything that actually comes at us through the internet, through the news, on the radio, through the television, or directly in life, that gives us that, oh my God, instant fear reaction. Now, obviously, if you're already in a state of anxiety, as I know some are, then your ability to withstand and to put up with things before the trigger is, oh my God, before you go into that state, is very, very much reduced. In other words, what I'm saying is you're hypersensitive to those trigger points. So therefore, everything that we sort of talk about is going to be extra, you're kind of further up the point of being triggered. Okay, so that's the kind of nature of anxiety and stress. Well, let's just look at this in terms of being able to get into the habit, at the end of this 45 minutes or so, get into the habit of actually stopping the instant knee-jerk habitual reaction when information comes to us that seems to be triggering us to go into that state of being, the fearful state of being. So what we're going to do is go through this coronavirus, and we'll come on to 5G perhaps a little bit later on, and we'll see where else it goes. Now, having said all of that, I'm not averse to anybody that's got separate questions about dowsing. Hugo might have a separate question on dowsing, particularly that doesn't apply to this sort of fearful scenario that we're talking about. But, you know, just launch it in and we'll see whether we can deal with it as we go along. That's why these conversations become so meandering. Okay. So I guess what I've really done here, these are my notes that I'm referring to. I sort of scribbled down this morning. I always like to try and get some kind of structure, even though it doesn't seem like it. But what I realized was that, you know, my experience of 30 years of working in communications, working as a television professional, television in the loosest terms, and non-broadcast as well as some broadcast projects, has meant that the way that I see information when it comes to me through the media is very, very different to maybe those that haven't had that experience. And as a writer, I'm very aware of how writers work and how video makers work in terms of compiling a story. Now, I use the word story to mean fictional or factual information. And one of the biggest things that I've noticed about all of the coronavirus coverage is just about the stuff that isn't being included. News in the UK, we have a half an hour, I think it is, at 10 o'clock, right? Like most countries probably have similar, or you've got a constant news channel, heaven forbid. I try not to watch the news because of this very reason that we're talking about. It's just, yeah, it's propaganda that is packaged in a certain way to influence certain things. But 10 o'clock news, I'm going to say some really obvious stuff now. 10 o'clock news has an editor, so there's somebody in charge of the content. So that person's job is to make the content as powerful as possible, so that as many people will come back the next day and the next day and the next day to watch, let's say, the BBC News rather than, shall we say, Channel 4 News or ITV News. So in other words, the job of the program makers is to make that news content as gripping and as dramatic, as newsworthy as possible. Now, I think today there were 5 more cases of coronavirus diagnosed here in the UK. And that's okay, fine. So that's a fact. Let's take that as a fact. What they didn't say at the same time was how many cases of flu have been diagnosed today here in the UK. And I suspect there's probably something like 200, at least. Putting a context to the information that is put across in the news story is key to how it goes down with the audience. If I told you about my journey yesterday or on Friday, let's say the journey I had on Friday, right? This is a really simple example. Journey I had on Friday to the local shop to go and buy some paper for printing. I went out of here, I drove down that track. Some of you will have seen a photograph of the track that we have to go down. It's about a mile long to get to a road. So we go through a country track, and it's been destroyed by flooding and what have you. But on Friday, I went up onto the main road and then realized that there was a massive great sinkhole right across the road, and I only just avoided going into it. Heaven forbid, that was a close shave. Really interesting. It's a complete lie, but it makes a story. What actually happened on Friday was I drove to the shop without any incident whatsoever, bought something, came back home again, did the normal boring stuff, and there's no story in that. There's no excitement, there's no interest. The key thing is the drama of the sinkhole appearing and the lie that I told you. Now, I'm not saying that news is lying. What I'm saying is it is packaged in such a way to grab your attention and to maintain your attention. And if they put a comparison every time they did a tally of how many people are suffering from coronavirus against the flu virus, there would be no story. There is no information. There is no drama to the story. There is no impact. And the impact, unfortunately, for us as a species is that we get terrified because we either trust or we assume that the information that's coming from a reliable source, let's say the BBC, is accurate. What we don't do is even think about what they're not telling us. Now, there are other arguments in all of this, which we don't want to go into, about conspiracy theories and about media being controlled by the government. But what we have to assess and be aware of is that any media is at some level being used to influence the masses to whom it is addressing. And that's, you just take that as read. You just take that as accepted, that the media is an influencer. And that those in charge of the media are using it as such. Now, all the quarantine, and Margie has mentioned quarantine there, the word quarantine, all of the action at the moment and all the quarantine actions that are being taken at the moment are clearly to contain the virus. In whichever country the outbreaks occur, the quarantine position is put in place. They're not doing that quarantine because the virus is so deadly. What we're not dealing with is a plague virus like some 1970s or 80s horror movie. It is a virus very similar to flu, and other coronaviruses have been around for some time. So the point is that now is that, no, you see, Margie is not afraid at all. Margie's really grounded and sensible in all this stuff. But the point is that what they're trying to do, as is an appropriate response, is to limit the spread of the virus so that actually it doesn't become in future years yet another virus that the 7.5 billion souls on the planet are subjected to, and therefore cost masses of money. And obviously we lose some lives in relation to that as well. Now, I'm not saying this lightly. I don't talk about death or people dying or being made very ill and unwell lightly. I'm just saying that in terms of control of the masses, of managing the population on the planet, then there has to be a strategy. And actually the World Health Organization is part of the strategy of saying, right, okay, get the quality going. Oh my God, this is a killer. No, it's not. So one of the best things that could happen is actually that the virus continues to spread. Okay, I apologize for saying this, but this is, as far as I'm concerned, factual. I think that this is the best way forward. And you can disagree, but let's not have the argument now. If the virus spreads out and the human population is then therefore moderately exposed to it, yes, obviously we're going to lose some. Bearing in mind it's not a plague terrifying virus. So in other words, it wouldn't be as powerful and as devastating as, for example, the 1918 Spanish flu pandemic. What would happen is that the human species, the physiology, reacts and creates the immunities, and therefore you get a vast percentage of the population thereafter for next year already immune to it. The virus migrates, it might mutate, sorry, the virus mutates and changes, just like the flu virus changes. There are several different types of flu virus, and they mutate all the time. This is why sometimes the flu vaccinations don't work one particular year, because actually the type of flu that they're vaccinating against isn't the one that becomes prevalent that year. It's a different mutation. And so therefore the vaccine actually is useless against it. It's just fact. They can't vaccinate everybody with the vaccinations across all flu strains every year. It's just a financial issue. So I think what you're getting at is where I come from, is that I don't feel that actually the amount of panic that is being instilled in people because of the way they're reading the media, in other words, what I mean is the way they're interpreting the information that they're getting, is terrifying them. But they're not seeing the very simple things of understanding the way the information is being given to them. This seems like a subject that isn't really very kind of in line with what we usually discuss. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a way that we can be as a species manipulated, Matt. There's all sorts of things, and we can go right down into the conspiracy theory avenue. But really, the bottom line that I'm trying to get at is that it's up to us we're in our power as spiritual beings within the human form. We're in our power when we understand or can actually allow our brains, whether it be the logical side or on the intuitive side, to actually process the way that we are receiving information. Now, some of you may remember in the past that when I've talked about one of the early learnings from my guide from Merlin, one of the things that he said was that actually the media giving you information rank it much lower in terms of priority than the information that you get on a day-to-day in your immediate environment in that situation. So what I'm saying is the information that you get coming to you through your five senses day-to-day is far more significant and powerful and far closer to source, of course, because it's part of source rather than source removed, if you like, through the media and through the manipulations and through the energy exchanges that takes place before it actually gets to you as a being on the other side of the screen or wherever it is. That sounds a bit of a convoluted way of simply saying, be mindful. That was a rant, wasn't it? The amount of stress that is caused by the depth of fear is massive. And what we know that stress does, stress, being in fear, basically makes you far more open to infection and attack from viruses, for example, than not being in stress. I mean, that's scientific fact, that's indisputable. there is a great need, there is a great desire for the 7.5 billion souls on the planet to be in a state of stress, primarily because when you're in that state of stress, you're also removed from your ability to manifest and create. People who are in fear cannot connect to their loving, creative source energy. Now, when I was growing up, or in my teens, the biggest fear that was surrounding most people was the Cold War, was the threat of a nuclear annihilation, the ongoing threat of Russia versus America. And that was an incredible threat that was hanging over us all the time. Now, of course, before that, in the 60s, there would have been the Cuban Missile Crisis, for example, exactly the same scenario, Russians and Americans playing silly buggers. Whether or not there was ever going to be the point of pressing the button in that sense, I don't know. But I do remember a cameraman that I used to work with a lot. He had been stationed in America, and he was present when supposedly it was said that the president of the United States might not live to see the morning. I think it was something like that. I may not live to see the morning, or something. I can't remember what it was, but that was on the point of the Cuban Missile Crisis. So we need to be aware that times are changing massively in terms of the amount of people that are waking up spiritually around the world. I mean, this is the bottom line. The energy of the planet is changing hugely. And whether that is due to the intention of the management upstairs, or whether it's due to an area of the universe that we are flying through, is actually irrelevant. But what is happening for sure is that more and more millions are waking up and realizing that life is not quite what they thought. That sort of energy is about people stepping into their power and about galactic wars that may or may not have been taking place. I'm not laughing because I don't agree. I'm laughing because it's a concept, and I'm laughing because I didn't expect to be even touching on that. But the point is that we cannot deny the change. Now, as we go through that change, we need to be as fully in our power as those that are already awake. Okay, everybody here, as much of those, as much energy of those that are near you as you can along the same path. Now, this doesn't mean that you're brainwashing others around you. What it means is that by your example, in that classic way of live the change that you want to see, in other words, be the change that you want to see, that's the right phrase. Simply by being that, you're taking other people along with you, and you're in interacting with people of a similar wavelength, or a similar vibration, and therefore your reality is going in that direction, and that's where you want it to go. You want to avoid as much as possible the settling into the fear mentality. And just like any period of change, this is the big shake-up that we're going through now. Now, this could go on for years. You may remember, and David was actually instigated this. I think it was David, who's on the chat, who asked, I think it was David, or it might have been another David. But anyway, he asked at the end of last year what this year, 2020, would have in store. And he asked of Merlin, and the response that was given was that 2020 was going to be very good. It's going to be a very good time. But there was also a feeling in that conversation, it's on one of the videos, that terrible buffering. Okay. All right. Well, we'll try and just keep that nice and smooth, maybe, is what we're talking about. So in that message that came through from Merlin on that time, there was the suggestion that a lot of people were going to find these 2 years, 20 and 21, very, very difficult. And I think this is exactly what we're seeing. We're only in March, and we're already seeing a huge dichotomy between those that are riding the wave, that are riding the fear and coping, and those that are already getting submerged within it globally. And this is the first time I think that really it's been manifested globally. What we've had in the past is we've had countries in their own fear vortices, if you like, a strange use of the word, but that's what it feels like. And now what we've got is a global process of change. Okay, so what we are, okay, let's get back to this fear. Let's just look for a second at what fear does for your system, your energy system, because obviously, as we know, most of it just dives straight in. As soon as we get fearful and we get stressed, what happens is that your fight or flight physiology kicks in. And as a modern human being, you very rarely get involved in either fighting or running away from something. So you sit there with all of this adrenaline coursing around your system and all the other hormones or whatever the physiological changes are, flooding your system with stress, and it takes some time for it all to dissipate. That's on the assumption that the next day you don't get up and get the same stress. So this is the sort of thing that actually will really wear down your health anyway. I mean, just on a purely practical physiological basis. If you're living in stress all the time, then you will become unwell. There's no two ways about that. So you really, really, really want to try to do whatever you can to avoid it. And I personally just keep coming back around to the meditation, to creating that safe space. Okay, so that's an interesting use of that phrase. Creating the safe space that you can take your mind into and that you can be really mindful and living in that moment. That's the essence of the meditation and the mindfulness. So if the regulars of you haven't yet kind of really started to put the meditation into practice in your daily activities, then I really would encourage you to do that. It really, really is so important. It enables you to step out of the daily stress of the monkey chatter. And it enables your body to see that it can get periods where it can just stop. And actually in those periods of stopping, start to recuperate, start to recharge, start to regenerate. If you're stressed to the extent that you can't get good sleep, then that's what you need. You need these tiny moments that you can then build upon. The meditation will, of course, help you with your connection to upstairs and to intuition. Whether or not you want to express that connection to upstairs as being a connection to any personalities in spirit is entirely up to you. You can do exactly the same thing working with your perceived reality rather than having to speak to a spirit. Where am I going with this? I suppose when we start to talk about 5G, this is where it gets really interesting, because this is where we relate fear, 5G, and the concept of mind over matter, which is really what we're working with on this channel. It's where it gets really, really interesting, because science, now, okay, so there are going to be those amongst you that dispute all of the sort of mainstream science that says fundamentally, in fact, there's a quote here from the World Health Organization, which, you know, I know we can dismiss this stuff, but let's take the World Health Organization as a example of, let's say, hopefully somebody that is taking the middle ground and not overly biased in its opinion. And the World Cancer Report 2008, according to the IARC World Cancer Report 2008, the incidence of brain tumors, for example, introduced since the introduction of widespread mobile phone use has remained relatively stable. It says, after 1983 and more recently during the period of increasing prevalence of mobile phone users, the incidence has remained relatively stable for both men and women, 2005. In announcing results for glioma and meningioma, Dr. Christopher Weil, director of the International Agency for Research on Cancer, so that tells us what IARC stands for, said, an increased risk of brain cancer is not established from the data from Interphone. However, observations at the highest level of cumulative call time and the changing patterns of mobile phone use since the period studied by Interphone which was pre-2008, particularly in young people, mean that further investigation of mobile phone use and brain cancer risk is merited. So what the World Health Organization there is basically saying is, we don't know. We don't know. Now, what we know from empirical evidence is that a lot of people do feel that they are subjected to EMF radiation, which gives them bad effects, gives them bad symptoms, creates illness. And I don't dispute that, you see. If I get a client coming to me and they are complaining of EMF radiation and they are fearful of it, and they express different, they'll describe different symptoms. They might be spiking. I had a lady and a gent recently who were unable to sleep in one particular room in their house because they were getting what they referred to as EMF interference. They were getting spikes. They were getting effects from it. Now, I don't know, in all honesty, whether it was EMF or not. And when I did the dowsing on their property, actually, most of the EMF influences that appeared to be taking place in their house weren't actually affecting their bedroom where they were trying to sleep or where they couldn't sleep. So I don't know, you see, because we also have evidence, again, empirical evidence, factual based experience evidence from somebody, a friend of ours, Paul Gerry, the neurophysiologist at Exeter and Devon Hospital that I've quoted before. And he says that EMF, there's no such, well, he says, because he's a science-based guy, and I disagree with this point, he says that there is no evidence for EMF sensitivity. But what he says is that he sees many patients with functional neurological disease. They can have epileptic type attacks, be paralysis or appear blind, all with no organic pathology. In other words, there's no physiology showing up in all the tests that he's doing. EMF sensitive people are in that group. So in other words, you can be EMF sensitive but not have any physiological issues. And so what is that saying? Largely what that's saying, as far as I'm concerned, now obviously bear in mind that I'm bringing to this discussion all of my own cognitive biases. Largely what that's saying is that if we think we're being subjected to radiation that is harmful, then we will manifest symptoms. That's the nocebo effect. In the same way as a placebo effect will be something that if we think something is going to be good for us, it will be good for us. A nocebo effect is if we think something's bad for us, then it will be bad for us. And I'm saying this not because I'm taking sides or because I'm saying in any way that EMF radiation might not be harmful. What I'm actually saying is, if we think it is, it will be. And the opposite to that is, when we have faith and trust, when we're doing the house healing work, the remote healing work that we do, I have to have faith and trust that the management upstairs is going to influence a person's property for the better. Because the more trust that I have, and this is partly what I teach to the mentoring students, the more trust and faith that the house healer, if we call them that, has, then the more likely that is to happen. Now, that's not placebo. That's not placebo. That's not the person being worked on knowing or believing that they're going to have some positive, some effect is going to be positive. That is something else. That's a third-party influence occurring, and that's why I am able to have the faith and the trust that actually the management upstairs is a real thing. It has a real influence upon what goes on in this physical dimension. Okay, I'm just going to come back around to some of these questions because you've been great in putting them in a good highlight. Yeah, that's right. Yes, 5G as in mobile phone and Wi-Fi stuff. Yeah. Okay. One theory is 5G will lower the immune system so that the common virus could be more effective. Yeah, I mean, exactly, Matt, that's fine. Okay, and let me just catch up with you guys there. Yes, now, yes, you see, it's interesting, you see, Margie, Yes, exactly. Oh, great. Yes. Hi, Gina. Okay, excellent. Look, I love the way that I love it. Thank you. I'm not going to refer to those. Matt, those are great points. It's lovely about fire. Yeah. Um, and this is what we're trying to get to with all of this. It's about your attitude to it. It's about, no, I won't say your attitude. It's about our attitude to it. Whatever it is, whatever we think is impacting adversely upon us, if we go along with that victim mentality, continuing to think, well, it is doing us harm, then yeah, it will continue to do us harm. Now, of course, you're going to say, well, look, you've got somebody here with cancer. They've got lung cancer. The chances are they're going to die from that lung cancer. Well, that's not quite what I'm saying. So what am I saying? There are many influences upon us. There are so many influences upon us. And part of our role as a human being in processing these influences and trying to understand is to assimilate what the whole overall picture is. But on an emotional level, what does it mean to us? What does it mean to us as an individual? What does the circumstance mean to us? Now, if we are a person who is terrified of catching coronavirus, then we are living in fear. What does fear mean to that individual? Let's say that I am terrified of coronavirus, and even though I'm living in a remote situation, I'm terrified of going out. I don't want to go to the post office again because I might see somebody with coronavirus. From the perspective of the spiritual being in a human experience, what does that scenario break down and illustrate to me? So in other words, step back from the presentation that it is a person being terrified of a virus. It is about an energy, that person being in fear of, in this case, an unseen threat. The virus, it might kill me, but I can't see it. I don't know anything about it. So therefore, what else in that person's life up to that point, for me, let's say the 57 years of getting to this point, where else does fear manifest within my awareness, in the themes, in the scenarios that I've been through in my life that reflect that unseen threat of attack? Well, I can take you straight there. I can take you straight there. I can take you straight to 4 years of being the youngest year in my secondary school, due to the way that the education system was structured at that point, when we combined with another school, which was incredibly violent, incredibly troubled school. Our very respectable school, full of wimps like me, was suddenly twinned with this other school where the guy, these guys were head cases, and we had 4 years of bullying by gangs just marauding through corridors, and not only that, I mean, inter-school fighting as well. I mean, literally where police vans were called and all sorts of things. But basically what I'm getting at is I was living in fear for 4 years of my education, with the threat of attack round virtually any corner, it seemed. And so therefore stress level was going up. So that is an echo of if I was now subjected to that same fear of coronavirus from something that was unseen, could pounce at any time, could appear. It's a spiritual, manifested, created picture. Now, yes, so therefore we can then put into all of this stuff that, yes, it's created by somebody else. It's created by the powers that be. It's created by the governments in order to control the masses. That's all fine. That's all fine. That's all stage direction. That's all there at the front of our reality, the physical reality that we experience. That's all the stuff that we put in place. Shakespeare said all the world's a stage, and that's all the stuff that he would put on that stage. Governments are in control of the masses, but that's not the point. If you come right back and you start to look at it from the individual perception, your own individual awareness, your own individual connection to the truth the source energy that is always with you, and that you are actually working on as you follow a spiritual, or it's a pretentious word, isn't it, but a spiritual path, and you're going through a healing, then what you're doing is actually looking at these fundamentals in your energy system. And it doesn't matter that everybody else is going through the same thing in that sense. Obviously it does as a human being, but that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about looking at it from the spiritual perspective. Does that make sense? You've been chatting away, and that's all good. Clear the fear, someone's on the way. Quite right. I'm not going to try and say your name. So, Mr. D in the mix, good to see you. Just trying to catch up on these. Yes, that's right. That's true as well, Gina. It's true. Everybody has got these completely different levels of being subjected to different things. Yes, and Voican, Full Monty agrees with you. Yeah, so quite often, actually, a friend of mine tends to refer to the way that different people, different groups of people get affected by different stuff. You can always use it as the law of thirds. Is that a third of people will be really badly affected by something, a third of people will be like, meh, not really so bad, and a third of people, it won't even touch them, more or less. And the other thing about viruses such as coronavirus, let's say, but things like, you see, the big issue for me now with all of this stuff and in verifying sources, unless you go to a really rock solid scientific, majorly scientific paper, which quite frankly I haven't got the time or the intelligence to read half of the stuff, and anyway, you then start to question sometimes the validity of the material and the study, the size of the study or whatever in that material. But the big thing that really rocked for me, rocked the foundation of confidence in a lot of the media and a lot of the information that we get given is, for example, something stupid like, we don't have to go very far back to be aware of the tobacco companies telling us that, oh yes, of course, there's no problem with tobacco. Now, and of course, that's just one of the major scams of big industry, and we're all hugely aware now of big pharma, big industry, and all the corporations just making a killing just because they can, and literally making a killing. But what's interesting is that all the time, we as energy beings, as human beings, are counteracting some of that stuff, even when we don't realize it, because factually, it is evident that those people under 65 years of age, and this was a few years ago, people under 65 years of age actually had developed a mutation within their cells to be far more resistant to the ill effects of smoking. So in other words, the physiology had already started to work to counteract the environment of having smoke poured into the body all the time. So the balance is incredible. We're talking about smoking there anyway. Right, guys. So we've got 15 minutes left. And what I really want you to do is to think about how, when you next see any information, and we all know that social media is ripe for just headlines, smashing rubbish that really gets people riled. We know that that's the case, and we know that that is, over the fullness of time, the youngsters that are growing up now are going to have to deal with are going to have to learn ways of dealing with that, because it is the social media environment for certainly people of my generation. No, let's say for me, I find it really difficult to assimilate information through Facebook and all this sort of stuff, mainly because it just does my head in. So I avoid it. So those of you that are friends with me on Facebook or following me on Facebook will see that I don't use it a lot, and actually half the time I've got no idea how to use it. So future generations are going to have to be really, really aware of the technology that they're using to communicate. What we need to do now is to be, and this is just reiterating, is to be really mindful of how information is coming to us from all of these news sources, and always remembering really that the bottom line is somebody wrote something. Now, I'm ignoring the use of bots on social media and on places like Twitter, where they'll just generate and throw back at you what you've already put in from countless tweets and all the rest of it. Okay, but if you think that most of the time somebody has written an article, and just look at what the subtext of that article would be, most of the time websites are gaining income from advertising, or they are running a system where they're being paid for advertising. It's rather like YouTube. I mean, YouTube. I'm a slave to YouTube because I have to do a certain amount of production and what have you, in order that Google gets its ad revenue. So we are a slave to the system in that sense, but we need to be rather more aware of the slave nature of it once it starts to attack us in that sense. Okay, so what I'd like to say is stop looking at the nonsense and just get on with your own lives, meaning just be mindful of what's in your own environment and look at those facets. And that's something that I won't ever tire of saying, because it is a fundamental truth and a very, very practical way of living and a very practical way of reducing the stress levels. Just ignore what is going on out there and concentrate on your connection to upstairs and see that connection reflected in your immediate environment, in the immediate, your friends that you meet in real life, in the people that you meet in real life, in your families. All of these things are directly created. So I'm looking down here because I'm looking at my notes, because as usual, I feel like actually what I've done today is just kind of like, hey, I'm back after a month and I'm just going to rant. So ask some questions. Yeah, good, Tom. Thank you. There have been a few. Ask some questions and we'll wrap up for 10 minutes, okay? So, and Hugo, I don't know whether you had any particular dowsing questions that you wanted to get in, but I've kind of rabbited on. I think it's important. Oh, yeah, good one, Jim. Yes, Tammy, let's send some positive vibes to Tammy. And Billy as well, Billy's craft room. Bless her. I don't know whether she's under the weather, but Billy is not with us today in her what was a very useful role as moderator the last time we did a live. But it's good to see you, Jim. I've just realised I've now connected you to Tammy. Yeah. Yeah, Andy, it's a tricky one, because those that are regulars know that I'm not really that kind of a medium. I just crap at the whole expectation and delivering a message to people that come along and ask for a message specifically from him. We have to go with the flow when we feel that connection. JF. Can we heal our fear with our guide? Well, I think one of the big ways of you can ask your guide for help. Excuse me. You can ask your guide for help. There's don't forget that those of you that are regulars will know about dowsing and finding the Earth Energy Power Center in your house. If you meditate on the Earth Energy Power Center, if you stand on that Earth Energy Power Center, and you just imagine, you can feel the fear in your system, and you can imagine it, visualize it flowing out, down through your legs and out through tiny little holes in the back of your heels or something like that into the earth, because the earth will take that sort of energy away from you. The Mother Earth is there for that, not for that very reason, but she's completely capable of working with you as an energy being in that sense. So a visualization like that, but use the power center that you work with, or ask to be shown a specific one that you might want to be doing that with if you don't want to do it with the one that you sit in meditation on. But that one will be the most powerful and most positive one. So I recommend using that. So you can do that. But yeah, sure. I mean, the point of having a guide, a spirit guide, is that they are there to assist you in this learning process. And so if you call on them for help, then they will help. Now, the other thing is, walking in the woods is a brilliant way of keeping your energy fresh. It's also a wonderful way of keeping grounded, and being grounded is imperative in all spiritual work. It's essential. Being in nature, yes, absolutely. Spot on, Gina. More and more, it's important to be out there. I was going to say, what was I going to say before I went to answer Gina's question? I don't know, I've forgotten it, so it can't have been that helpful. Well, I've got notes, but man. The other thing, let's just wrap up in the real, still 20 minutes somehow. Still 10 minutes, sorry, 10 minutes still, which I thought I'd said just now. One thing that I'd like to kind of leave you with is the idea that, well, perhaps all of this fear is being provided for a reason. And shaking up everybody with the fear, okay, certainly getting old, Monty, thank you. Certainly shaking things up with the fear, it's got to be a good thing in some ways. It has got to be a good thing in some ways. It allows us to consider and to take stock and to assess. If we choose to look, we can always find something to be scared of. If we choose to look, we can always find something to be scared of. And sometimes the fear is there because we are familiar with it, and we find being without the fear and more uncomfortable because it's an old friend. We walk in step with the old friend as a support. It's familiar. And sometimes that is the aspect that we need to heal. It's to become at ease with the unfamiliar, to become at ease with those aspects that you welcome in as you change and as you heal. Because healing isn't always an easy process. It's not something that is just given, something that is just presented to you. It's a process of struggle, because you go from one state of being to another through steps, and sometimes those steps are hard to follow and hard to take. And sometimes the healing involves losing loved ones as well. Grief is a very real aspect of healing, as well as the other way around. We heal from grief, eventually. But everything that is in our lives is an aspect, an energy aspect, reflecting back the energy point that we are. And we've talked about that so many times, but that is the truth. Everything is a reflection on different levels of your inner torment, which you are healing. And being aware of it is the first step to that very deep and significant healing. And so really what we're seeing is 7.5 billion people going through a process of healing. But the result is a massive swathe of fear, which I have no doubt is detectable right across the universe. So, any last questions, guys? That's great, Tom. Being guided to art. It's a great way. It's a great way to. Yeah, he was weekend. Thank you. It was nice to have him here. He's been in and out. There's quite a delay on the chat. Yeah, it's been Jim, are you you're in the UK? I wouldn't go out barefoot at the moment. I wouldn't go out barefoot at the moment. Yes, but being worried for children. I mean, you know, JF, that we've just had Boozy. Yeah. Oh, great. Okay, Boozy, that's excellent. Terry, excellent. Well done. Yeah, there you go. There you go. USA, Jim. Oh, okay. So maybe it's getting warmer over there. That's great. Yeah, definitely get out. Get out in nature barefoot. So, guys, leave some comments when we finish this, which we will do shortly, about what you'd like to talk about next week. I can imagine that. Weekend, full Monty, barefoot in Denmark, worse than catching the coronavirus. Gold. What do we want to talk about next week? What do we want to move ourselves forward with? I actually feel quite sad for the amount of fear that's around, but it's okay. It's okay. You go back to that spiritual platitude of everything occurs at the right time and everything is exactly as it should be in all senses. So thank you, Stevie. That's very kind. I'm not sure I've been calm. I felt I was ranting. But yeah, just leave a comment and leave a question, and we'll build something together for next Monday. We'll do the same thing again. I'm not sure how we will longer term progress with the Monday moments. I want to keep doing them, but it might be that we do them more on an ad hoc basis. We'll see how that goes. Pop your views down there. Oh yeah, I'm fine. I'm Voiken. I might be sounding a little bit low just there, but I'm absolutely fine. I've got to do a radio interview later. Hey, another 4 hours time, I'll be on the radio somewhere in Canada, America. I'll see if I can find the link and pop it in down below if anybody wants to listen to that. So, yeah, have a good time. Don't get stressed. I'm reminded of the fact that Corona actually is a beer over here in the UK, and so we all like a beer, but let's not go down that direction. So, see you next week, and we'll go from there. Yeah, we'll go from there. Except I know I kind of feel like I want to go, but I don't want to go. And the reason is I got one thing that I was asked about. And this is something that somebody was getting particularly concerned about. Yeah, good. Okay, passionate's fine. Yeah. Dark Night as the Soul. This is quite appropriate. It's not really Dark Night as the Soul, but I'm thinking of Dark Nights, and that is that somebody asked me what I thought about satellite proliferation. At the moment, we've got people like Elon Musk throwing up 20,000 satellites or something to provide internet access around the globe through satellite. And of course, what people are getting concerned about is the fact that the night sky will be covered by artificial lights, so you won't be able to see the stars. It's not going to be as bad as that. And actually already NASA is taking steps to actually limit the amount of satellites. And it is a big serious thing in astronomical circles. So those that are in charge of that side of things in terms of admin, they're on the case, and it won't be the fearful, again, you see, it's a fearful prospect of the natural sky being eliminated any more than it is already in so many urban centers where you can't even see the sky. Okay, guys. So are we going now? We are now going. And we'll see you next week. I've taken forever to say goodbye, but cheerio. See you next week, guys. Take care. Bye.